Get ready for mayhem, my friends, because today is the last day that we're looking at the prequel to the book of Nehemiah, which is the book of Ezra. And you might recall that when we were getting started on this season, I was saying again, like, I think that Ezra and Nehemiah, I think they're one book. They fit together. It's like the one just runs right into the next. And I think when we get done with today, it's going to be really evident that that is the case, because it doesn't feel like Ezra ends. It feels like a great big problem is beginning to be addressed, but it is not solved. And then that's just it. There's no more. There's no Ezra 11. Ezra 11 is really kind of Nehemiah 1. So just put that in the back of your mind. We're going to get there. But I promised mayhem, and here comes the mayhem. Now is the part where you got to put the toothpaste back in the tube. Now is the part where you got to find a way to make the eyesight work again after somebody poured Drano in there. If you didn't catch the episode where we talked about that, that was probably terribly confusing and morally disorienting for you. Just don't worry about it, or just go back a couple weeks. It was there. I promise it'll all make sense. Now is the part where you have to fix the kind of mistake that you really can't easily unmake. A mistake so severe, so historically tragic, so different than how we would conceive of a mistake today with modern sensibilities, that Ezra did public mourning over the thing and ripped out his hair and ripped out his beard and did a big public prayer with such aplomb and grandiosity that people started to gather around him and be like, "Hey, pal, what's wrong? Why are you crying and ripping out your beard like that? It looked better before you ripped out your beard. You should leave it in there." And then they start to figure out what he's upset about and who he is. I mean, this isn't exactly how you'd expect the highest ranking priest in your nation of priests to be behaving. And just gradually it gets everybody's attention. In the end of chapter 9 and into chapter 10, we get the sense that people are really starting to take notice of what is going on. And there's some kind of groundswell, even though people don't get it yet, of support for this cause. There's some kind of sense that we got something really, really wrong, and we're going to need to address it. And then, of course, Ezra does the big prayer that we looked at yesterday. And now in chapter 10, we pivot from the part where it's all theory, it's all ideas, it's all, I'm sorry that we did this, this is tough, we're making big mistakes, it's speech giving, it's good stuff, but it's not action yet. Chapter 10 is where we pivot into the action, and this is very difficult action, and I'm not even sure totally socially and emotionally what tone to take today as I'm doing this. So this is where my head's at, and I guess this is the tone that we're going to get. Here's what happened, Ezra 10. While Ezra was praying and confessing, weeping and throwing himself down before the house of God, a large crowd of Israelites, men and women and children, gathered around him, and they too wept bitterly. Now, some of them probably didn't even know about the prayer. They're just like contagious crying, but some of them probably really understood what they were weeping about. It comes into focus as we go along. Then Shechaniah, son of Jehiel and one of the descendants of Elam, said to Ezra, "We've been unfaithful to our God by marrying foreign women from the peoples around us, but in spite of this, there is still hope for Israel." Okay, so the prayer that Ezra made that was very public, it seems to have inceptionized in the mind of others this idea that, yeah, there has been unfaithfulness here. You were told by God not to do this in this very unique time under these very unique circumstances, and you did it. This is the same mistake we made before, but again, echoing the prayer of Ezra, his leadership is really starting to come through here. This person, these people who come up to him, they're saying, but there is still hope, right? So they see that as well. So they have a proposal for Ezra. "Now let us make a covenant before our God." Now, before I say what the covenant's about, that's a really important sentence. Did that pop for you? It's supposed to, because covenant, these are the benchmarks, the mile markers that we measure the Old Testament, nay, the entire Bible in. How many times have we talked about these deals that God makes with people, right? You get the covenant that God makes with Adam and Eve. You get the covenant that God makes with Noah about not wrecking the world ever again. Here's a rainbow to remind you of that. Then you get the covenant that God makes with Abraham, picking him out of the clear blue sky and being like, "You're going to be a people, and I'm going to give you a ton of descendants. You're going to be a great nation, and all the nations are going to be blessed through you." We've talked about the covenant that God made with Moses. We've talked about that one a lot because it really undergirds the whole plot of the Old Testament. We've talked a little bit about the covenant that God made with David to establish a ruler who will reign on the throne of David forever. That turns out to be Jesus of Nazareth. And there are other places as well where this language is used, but what's happening here right at the end of the narrative stuff of the Old Testament after tons of calamities is that almost spontaneously in a single day, and not just coming from the top down from the leadership and not even initiated by God this time, the people are rising up to say, let's make a covenant. Now, the covenant here is going to be a very practical one. We're going to see that these people are proposing. We need to unmake the very difficult to unmake mistake that we have made in marrying the foreign wives and inviting detestable practices from neighboring people into our culture and into our beliefs and our practices. But still, key here is that the language of covenant is being invoked. And we just got to put a big fat pin right in that, because that idea is going to get resolved and played the rest of the way out in Nehemiah. But here, back to Ezra 10, the proposal of this covenant is a very practical one. It says, now let us make a covenant before our God to send away all these women and their children in accordance with the counsel of my Lord and those who fear the commands of our God. Let it be done according to the law. Now you might be thinking, this is mean. And yeah, yes, not even yeah. I made it sound like it was like a hesitant yeah. No, it's mean. This is a tough deal. It's a really tough deal. And I don't know how you unmake really unmakeable mistakes. But in this case, the solution, though brutal, is obvious. You got to separate the people. That was the unique command of God for this unique people group at this unique time. They've seen enough breaking of the laws of time and space through the ages to say that this is real. This is the actual God. That's his actual command. And we are not being a people who's holy and set apart, a nation of priests and a unique people. We got to do this thing. I've talked at lengths about the differences between this moment in history and what happens after Jesus and in modern times. It's a very different thing. But here, this is the obvious, difficult step that has to be taken. And it sounds cruel. And at first you're reading this and you're just like, what, are they just going to take these women and children and like what, push them out in the desert or something? Give them a little lunchbox, the sandwich in there, and be like, good luck? Or is there going to be some kind of plan? Well, it turns out there's some kind of plan. In a minute, we're going to discover that they felt they could not settle this out quickly and that it took a lot of time to settle it out properly. And to me, that is indicative of the idea that the men who were the returning exiles who were in these marriages had to take some kind of financial responsibility for it. And they probably were also going to have some kind of legal responsibility with the families that their wives were from to somehow pay them back for the damage they had done by entering into a marriage that they were not allowed to enter into. Or to put it another way, they made promises that they could not keep. And it looks like these men were going to be on the hook for that in some way, or I think that's reasonable to assume. So again, verse 3, now let us make a covenant before our God to send away all these women and their children in accordance with the counsel of my Lord. That's a lowercase l, so I think that means Ezra. And of those who fear the commands of our God, let it be done according to the law. Rise up, this matter is in your hands. We will support you, so take courage and do it. So these guys come to Ezra, who's laying in a heap and covered in dirt, and he's got his beard ripped out, and they're like, all right, you're right. Look, it's not fun, but you're right, and we will follow your lead. Do what needs to be done. So Ezra rose up. There's a phrase again that should remind us of other phrases that have popped a lot throughout the book of Ezra and the end of 2 Chronicles. Remember, go up is the first key action / prepositional phrase that we get in Ezra at the end of 2 Chronicles. That phrase, go up, seems to indicate that if you'll take it, this blessing of God is being given to you. This reestablishment of your people and of your temple and your sacrificial system, and maybe even somehow, if not even right now, maybe a little bit later, the actual presence of God with you again. So I think rose up sort of pops off the page for me there in keeping with that go up language from earlier. So Ezra rises up and he put the leading priests and Levites and all Israel under oath to do what had been suggested, and they all took the oath. Then in summary, some administrative stuff happens, a proclamation goes out, and everybody, all the exiles, are required to appear. Fail to do so means forfeiture of property and being expelled from the assembly. So you would lose that cherished birthright, your ownership of this whole thing. You would lose your ethnic heritage, essentially. So you have to come, is the point. And within 3 days, everybody shows up from the tribes of Benjamin and Judah. That's the exiles. And it's rainy, so it's really tough to make all of this thing go. It helps me picture the scene that apparently the rain was so intense that it had to be mentioned a couple times here in Ezra 10. And then in verse 10, it says, "Then Ezra the priest stood up and said to them, 'You've been unfaithful. You've married foreign women, adding to Israel's guilt. Now make confession to the Lord, the God of your fathers, and do his will. Separate yourselves from the peoples around you and from your foreign wives.' The whole assembly responded with a loud voice, quote, 'You are right. We must do as you say.' But there are many people here." So apparently they're all still saying this in a loud voice. Like the first stuff, I can picture it. Now I imagine it got a little more mumbly. I assume this is the gist. "But there are many people here, and it's rainy season, so we can't stand outside. Beside, this matter cannot be taken care of in a day or two, because we have sinned greatly in this thing." I love that line. It's a wonderful acknowledgement of how difficult to unmake a mistake this initial mistake was. These guys went out and made promises to women, and even tacitly, a few of them, to children they went on to have, that they could not keep. They were offering something and giving them something that really, in this very unique cultural context, was not theirs to give. I'm tempted to just rush through it because I said we were going to finish Ezra today, but this is really important stuff for setting up Nehemiah the right way. So we're just going to take one more day on it. We'll finish Ezra completely tomorrow, and we'll just pick up right where we left off and get going again. All right, I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. See you tomorrow.